It's the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, open relationships, swinging, and how you can have secure and sexy relationships, no matter how you do them. Now here's your hosts, Tara and Andre.
Hey, hey.
Hey, Andre.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. This is so exciting.
Yeah, it sure is. This is season 2, right? We're older and wiser. Well, older anyway.
Yes, it's our very first episode of season 2 of the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast. After a bit of a hiatus, we have an exciting season ahead. And this season, we are going to have some very special guests and cover a whole range of topics to help you navigate non-monogamy in a way that's secure, sexy, and satisfying.
Yeah, it's going to be a fantastic season. It's going to be very interesting to see what direction it takes, where we go.
I don't know about you, Andre, but there's always discussion about people who are in a poly relationship, because I think it's a common thing that happens, especially if people are already partnered, is that one person may want to open up the relationship while another person might not want to. So Today we'll explore what these relationships are, why people might choose this dynamic. We'll talk about common misconceptions, any key challenges, and of course, our hot tips on how to address things.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's such an interesting conversation, right? Because, I guess there's people who would say or believe, or maybe I had at one point believed that, maybe it's best if we have mono or poly. But there may be some concerns about being polymono or monopoly, but there might also be some benefits, which we'll also look at as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. But first, a couple of announcements before we jump in. So depending on when you're listening to this may or may not be too late for you, but we are going to be at the Toronto Taboo Everything About Sex show, October 18th to 20th, 2024. We will be featured educators. So we'll be on the stage doing a seminar, and we'll have a booth. And so we'd love for people who are in the Toronto area or traveling to the show from a little bit further out to come in and say hello. Perhaps you might want to sit down and ask a question and get a little bit of coaching help on this.
Yeah, it's a big event. It should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I just actually looked at the description yesterday because I was like, how many people actually go to this event? And they think it was like, I thought that it said 1 million, but maybe that's across all the Taboo shows across all the cities. I'm not sure, but that's a lot of people. We got to get more cards.
Yeah, if it's 1 million, I'm not so sure that there will be 1 million at this event, but
Yeah.
I won't feel that way. But it's fantastic that we are being able to come out at this time and speak so openly about sex, relationships, identity, all that great stuff.
Yeah. And so we may even try to live cast a podcast there too, or at least go live into our group with a few little chats while we're there. A friend of mine's going to set us up with a microphone, and then hopefully we can use that and make it fun for people. So drop in and say hello. We'll put a link to how you can get tickets in the show notes.
Yeah, come be part of the show. It's all about community.
Yeah, it's a super fun show. Like, there's all kinds of cool things. Like, it is a lot about sex, but there's other things too. So you can pick up some fun things to enhance your sex life and learn stuff, which is great. So, and of course, we'll have something special for you if you drop by too. So definitely do that. And secondly, we're super happy to continue to extend our offer to our listeners to get our Poly Newbies course at 66% off the regular price. So we'll also include the link, because we really want to get this out there and help people really thrive in their open relationships, open and polyamorous relationships. And, so far, the people that have taken the course have been raving about it. And so we just want it out there, Yay, announcements. All right, so let's jump in. Okay, so some people may be listening to this and go like, what is a mono-poly relationship? I've certainly had people, so maybe you want to explain it.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Let's start with, what is it that we're talking about? What does it mean to have a mono-poly relationship? And essentially, it means that one person, one of the partners, is subscribing to or participating in monogamous relationships where they are one-on-one, seemingly, and the other person has a different orientation or different relating style where they are polyamorous and they relate to many other people, either emotionally or sexually, and the combination of that. But it is different in that one person would be practicing monogamy while the other person practices polyamory, but it's all done in agreement as opposed to, and consensually done as opposed to my previous form of monopoly, where I was in a monogamous relationship and did not have the wherewithal, courage, whatever it was, to announce my desire to be in a polyamorous relationship, or vice versa, right? So that's known as cheating, or on that side of the marriage. But essentially, it is, the agreement, the ethical agreement of one person being mono and the other person being poly. In that agreement, we come together as monopoly.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put a little asterisk on that because I think that people do consent and they agree to it, but the conditions upon which they agree to it may not be ideal. Like some people do agree or allow for a partner to be polyamorous and have multiple partners, sexual and emotional, but may do so for other reasons, and might to maintain the relationship, for example. So that is a condition that happens with people.
That's so interesting that we say that because, yes, that I guess is one of the kind of warnings to it, right? Are we well equipped that way? And maybe we say, well, we allow for it, but there might be other circumstances where we actually invite it and encourage it because it maybe does serve us. For example, if we have a mismatch of libido, for example, or if we are, or if perhaps we're one partner is traveling for long periods of time, and we might offer that to our partner and say, well, if you get lonely, I would want you to have some type of interaction with people, whether it's emotionally, physically, sexually, whatever it is, that you should not go without. And maybe there's a different orientation to us. Maybe I am more introverted than you are, and you are stimulated by having these different types of encounters with people. And I feel a relief that I don't have to be that way, or feel as though I'm able to express myself if you're not wanting to. So maybe there are good, encouraging benefits to being in this type of relationship.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that sometimes people want to do is explore different things. So maybe they want to explore kink, for example, or BDSM, and maybe their current partner it's not something they wish to engage in, and are happy for them to do that, right? So
yeah, absolutely, and that's a good thing, being happy about it, because maybe initially they say, well, I'm not that kind of kinky person. Maybe I won't be enough for you, or I won't be participating in these type of relationships, and that might send up flags of insecurity for me, saying I'm not enough. Whereas we might also see it as, well, I love you. I feel secure in this relationship. You love me, or we like each other, but I feel secure enough that you can go out and do that, and I'm okay. And I'm on board with your wanting to do these things, or you allow me to do these things. And it feels okay. It doesn't feel as though it is done because that's the only way I'm going to keep you. And we'll talk more about that.
Absolutely. So I think, that brings up a good point is, and, I think there's some common misconceptions about monopoly relationships, right? Like, I think sometimes when people hear that, they go like, oh my God, like someone was in a monogamous relationship and now they're being forced to become poly, or to allow for a partner to be polyamorous and have multiple relationships. So I think that's one of the misconceptions.
Or vice versa, right? We might be poly and find somebody who's mono, and we think, well, if they could just see the light, maybe one day they'll be more secure and open to opening up. But it's interesting for me, the idea is we might demonstrate or participate or present as one way, monogamous or polyamorous, and we participate in that, but is it really our orientation? In other words, I can participate in a monogamous relationship, but does my orientation want to be any other way? So we can often, participate in those things or demonstrate them, but does it really make for a good match? And maybe it could.
Right. I think sometimes people get into monogamous relationships, even though they identify as more open or polyamorous, because of this idea that, maybe someone they're with wants to be that way, or they feel like it's necessary in order to have things like go up the relationship escalator, like have a family, buy property, cover yourself in a will, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like have the security of having someone all the time. But I think often what happens in those circumstances when people force themselves to be monogamous when it's not their orientation is that they have a harder time adjusting to it and may even decide to come back to it.
Mm.
And then at that point, you're in a situation, and I have, people that I'm working with right now where, the one partner's like, I've always identified this way. I want to be polyamorous again. And it's, it can put the other person in a difficult position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've been on both sides of that, and I've been feeling as though my orientation was poly, but then tried to conform to monogamy so that I could participate in a relationship escalator, thinking that was the only way. And I find that now, even like this convention that's coming up, there is greater acceptance of being polyamorous, that there isn't just one way of being, that we could be just as valid if we're wanting to be any other way other than monogamous, but that we are able to make these announcements openly so that we can participate in consensual relationships.
Absolutely. So we're definitely going to talk more about, what you can do if you're in a monopoly relationship. But I do want to say that it is a completely valid relationship dynamic when it's entered into consensually under agreement, and there's respect for everybody's preferences and values in the relationship.
It made me think about, you and I, two people have their ability to make their choice, and they decide that this is the dynamic that they're wanting. But then how do they announce it to their friends and family? So whether you are the one who is poly or mono, and you say, well, my partner is wanting this or that, how will our family accept it? And do we concern ourselves with how they accept it? And do we then refrain from announcing it as opposed to saying, well, this is what our dynamics are and it works for us? It's interesting, all of that consideration that we inherit going into these relationships and how it may or may not make for the allowance of that expression.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great segue, as always, Andre, into some of the challenges of monopoly dynamic. And I think you hit it right on the nose, that expression, that sometimes, like even when we enter it consensually and we're happy about the situation, we have to sometimes defend ourselves to family and friends who might think we're either being manipulated or are concerned that, we are denying ourselves a true relationship or whatever it is.
Sure. That's a excellent point, right? So, you are, let's say, for example, monogamous and I'm polyamorous, and you happen to tell your constellation about it. And they're like, what? Like he's going out and he's seeing other people. He's just using you. Or maybe it's the other way and say, well, how could you do this to this wonderful partner? Like, what is it? Aren't they enough for you? Like, why do you have to go out and see these other people? It's interesting how it might not be as accessible because of their own misconceptions or insecurities. But again, that should not prevent us from exploring this if it's what works best for us. And we find that out by being open and honest in our communications.
Absolutely. And more things, which we'll talk about in a second. But I think the other thing that comes up, I think, for people is when you strongly identify as monogamous, it's that whole mindset around monogamy and then having a polyamorous partner can kind of put you at a bit of like uncertainty, I think, sometimes. And I think that could be one of the challenges with it is like, what is this relationship? How can I believe in monogamy and be with someone who's also, who's polyamorous?
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah. So do all the things that we hold sacred in monogamy, are they kind of negated or are they threatened if we have a partner who is not monogamous? So if one of the things that I feel is best about monogamy is that I have a partner who I can have a long-term relationship with, I can count on, is that automatically negated because they happen to also play tennis with other people? Or could they still have dedication to us, respect and honesty, all those other things that do come with me? And as we know, just because we're monogamous doesn't mean that we're going to automatically get those things, right?
Well, absolutely. And I think one of the key challenges of being in a monopoly relationship also happens in poly and mono relationships. And that's jealousy, and insecurity.
Right, exactly. So then I think what we can take from that is that it's not necessarily the type of relationship that is going to bring about jealousy, but really, are we secure to begin with? Because there are plenty of couples who are monogamous and jealousy still exists. And there are plenty of couples who are open or polyamorous and they have a very good handle on jealousy. So it's not inherent in the relationship style, but more to do with how do we relate and how do we feel about ourselves and how can we grow our greater level of security.
Right. I do feel though, like in a monopoly dynamic, jealousy can be something that's a little bit higher level than when you identify in the same way, because there are other people in the picture. And, the whole thing about compare and despair and all that stuff can come in play, especially if it's new, or even if it's something that you want, you might still experience those things of not being enough or all those things.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just by the nature of it being monopoly, there will be asymmetric dynamics to it, right? There will be some sort of kind of imbalance. You go out on other dates while I am by myself. When I'm being by myself, there's probably less opportunity for this position of jealousy to occur. Whereas when your partner is out with other people, it's a perfect breeding ground for it, right? We could be alone, and if we're not well prepared for it, it could definitely bring up feelings of jealousy and insecurity.
And you made a good point about asymmetrical freedom is like it can be difficult balancing the freedom one partner has versus the other partner's choice to be monogamous. And, that could happen just in general, but like it even could fall to like practical things. Like say, for example, you're sharing space or nesting or there's children involved. All of a sudden, I keep saying all of a sudden, like it's happening all of a sudden, but like the situation can arise where if one partner is engaging in other relationships with others, that they're not necessarily paying attention or doing their share of, taking responsibilities on the home.
It's interesting that you do say all of a sudden, because it makes me think about how we could start a relationship, either both being poly or both being mono. And then for whatever reason or reasons, it does shift and we decide, well, we want to change this. So you and I start off as poly, for example, and then for whatever reasons, I'm not quite feeling it or I want to take a break or whatever it might be. And I say, well, I'm not wanting to date other people. I'm okay with you're still dating it. Now we are monopoly. But what happens when we meet organically? We have a work romance or we meet at a bar or whatever it is, and it's not announced. And then we start having a liking for each other. And then we find out, oh, you're poly, I'm mono. We have to interrupt it and say, well, that's not going to work. Or couldn't we find ways of saying, well, there is enough common ground here and there is ways of balancing this out. We can talk about these things and we can come to an agreement on this. There are benefits to this.
Absolutely. And we talked a bit about like that situation where you meet someone who's poly. It might be that whole idea of accidental polyamory where you sort of fall into it and then all of a sudden have to figure out if it's something that might work for you.
It makes me think of the gods of love laughing at us from the clouds and saying, well, just when you think you have it figured out, we're going to throw a little something into the mix to keep you sharp.
Yeah. Well, that exact thing happened to a client of mine, but they like totally took it on and they've embraced it and they've wanting to learn like everything about polyamory that they can. They took our course, they're coaching with me, and it's amazing like how much they've learned and how they've figured out that like this is the thing that actually is for them, like being polyamorous. So
bully for them that they were willing to investigate this and look at it rather than just saying, well, I don't know what this is about it or what it's about, and turning from it without even giving us a chance to explore about it. They can explore it and then say, well, actually, it's not for me, but they were willing and able to avail themselves to it.
Exactly. I was actually thinking about something about insecurity as well. And on the side of the person, maybe that's polyamorous. So they may have some insecurity around the state of their relationship, if their partner may decide that they just want to be with someone who's monogamous and that it's just not going to work for them.
That's an excellent point, right? So it might seem as though the insecurity only lies with the person who is monogamous, but yes, absolutely. The person who is going out or not that might feel, well, is it enough for this other person, for this one who's not participating in these things? But also what's interesting to consider is the person who is polyamorous and might go on other dates. Do they ever come to the feeling, well, I'm being selfish in doing these things, or I'm asking too much of my own partner? And did they start to feel as though their way is not as viable?
Yeah.
So then the question is, how do we bring in that question? How can we talk about that? How can we invite that true dialogue with our partner to find out how they're feeling about it? And it always comes back to the question of communication, open, honest communication.
Open and honest communication and ongoing communication.
Yes, ongoing, precisely.
And having specific time to talk about things. And that's why one of the key pillars of our programs is about relationship reviews and check-ins. And you can, work through issues that come up, but you can also talk about things like you were talking about earlier in terms of wanting to change the dynamic of the relationship and how it works, and having opportunities.
It's such an interesting thing to consider, because how do we talk about wanting to modify the relationship? And we might not talk about it, but we might feel it. So we're better off if we talk about what is coming up for us and what's feeling. But if we have these conversations rather infrequently, it makes it much more difficult to have these conversations. Whereas when we do these kind of check-ins, when we are able to communicate more periodically, more frequently, it makes it much more accessible.
Yeah, exactly. And so speaking of communication, one of the key challenges are communication breakdown. If you're not practicing attunement communication with your partners and being completely open about, like you said, what you're interested in, what's going on, what you want, your needs, and etc. And I think sometimes some of those breakdowns happen because there's some assumptions made around a lot of things.
That's interesting too, right? It kind of, for me, goes back to the idea of, is this situational or is it my orientation? So say, for example, you and I are polyamorous, but then I'm starting to feel, for whatever reason, somewhat insecure. I might subscribe to monogamy with the belief, well, that would make me feel more secure if you would stop seeing other people. But it doesn't really come to address the issue of what was at play in making me feel insecure. What other ways can we address this other than shutting it down? Or by opposite, what does opening it up mean? Is it to kind of avoid certain intimacies or communications?
Mm-hmm. So one of the other key challenges that people face is around time and attention. Because while we believe that love is not a pie with a certain number of slices to hand out, time and attention can be limited. Time is limited. There's only 24 hours in a day. So the importance of ensuring both partners feel value and prioritized despite the different relationship structures.
Yeah, I just love the point about love as a drive. It is infinite, right? We never run out and say, well, I have no more love left to give. But yes, in practical terms, time is limited. It is finite. And how can we still go about this where we feel as though we are getting our needed and deserved amount of time?
Yeah, you make a good point about love. And I think, I don't know about you, but we've sort of grown up with this idea that, being monogamous is the normal way to be. And that, that we can maybe just love only certain people. And I find it as an interesting concept, and something that people still have a hard time leaning into, this idea that you can love multiple people and you can be in relationships with multiple people and feel secure and happy and awesome. That's how I feel about us and our relationship with others. Like, I feel like I have more love than I had when I was in monogamous relationship.
How interesting. The word compersion comes to mind.
Yes.
Maybe we can say a little bit about what compersion is for those who might not have heard it before or that familiar with it.
Yes. Well, practicing compersion is a great strategy for success for mono-poly relationships. So compersion is happiness.
The pleasure we get from our partner's pleasure, right? So the idea that they are receiving pleasure, they're receiving love, they're getting that, and we don't feel threatened by it. In fact, we feel just the opposite. We feel elated by the idea that they are receiving this love, just as we imagine they might feel for us. And it's such a wonderful threshold to cross over, because then you can really receive love without feeling, oh, well, my partner feels in any way threatened by this. Or when you see them receiving love or know that they are, you feel really genuinely happy for them that they are getting this. And it does not diminish or take away your ability to love each other or to have good feelings for each other.
Yeah, but it is something that people have a hard time with as well, is really having happiness for their partner's happiness when they're with somebody else, because there's still that idea that something's being taken away from us, which is why, while compersion is like amazing, and I would say like, I mean, for myself personally, I think I mostly have like, I don't know, 90% compersion. I don't even know what percentage. You don't have to have perfect compersion in order to be successful in non-monogamy, whether you're monopoly, polyamorous, open relationships, relationship anarchy. The one thing we try to teach people is to work towards neutrality around these things in order to address feelings of insecurity or jealousy. So it doesn't seem so insurmountable, because I think sometimes people believe that they have to be like happy for their partner's happiness or they can't be successful. And I don't think it makes it a really high level to achieve. You know what I mean?
I think,
neutral way to go.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think you're 100% correct. It's not an automatic thing that you will arrive at compersion, and it's not necessary to relate well. And maybe it is simply an added benefit. It is a gift that we kind of get. Well, like, wow, I feel that way. But on the other side of that, as you say, coming to a neutral palate is, I think, necessary in order to have that compersion, because if we do feel wildly insecure, it's unlikely we're going to have that compersion. So while we might not necessarily be able to really grab it and get it, it is a benefit to that. But I think we can definitely do things, and I know factually that we can do things to address our questions of insecurity and jealousy. So maybe in doing that work, it's not a promise, but you might receive a higher level of compersion. But it is something that we aspire to.
Yeah, and we're not going to go into it in this podcast, but we have several others on talking about jealousy. But I think one of the main things, that I would love to mention about that is like the first step is really understanding where your jealousy is coming from. Like, what is it that, is causing you to have these feelings? Is it a fear? Is it, what is going on? And so I think we talked about that last season and a couple of episodes, and it's really a helpful place to start.
Yeah, we did. We talked about that, and we've been talking about it for quite a while. And it's a wonderful point to bring up. And in that, looking at the jealousy, does it predate the relationship, or is there something going on that really, when this happens, I feel heightened in that feeling? So, and as we've mentioned numerous times, jealousy is an umbrella term for many things that are going on. But again, that's not the time for the conversation right now, but it is absolutely worth looking into, because we have to feel secure in these relationships, whether they are mono or poly.
Right. So one of the other strategies for success, I mean, we already mentioned it, but it's always worth mentioning again, is open, honest, and ongoing communication.
Without a doubt. What do we have if we don't have that?
Yeah, That's true. So, we talked about frequent check-ins and clear conversations about feelings, our own personal boundaries and needs and desires. And so keeping those at the forefront and keeping those lines of communication open and really working on effective communication strategies, including active listening. And of course, we have podcasts about that too, where one of them, when we talked about, the destructive communication practices versus effective communication practices. So.
But it's great that we announce and try to communicate our feelings. But when we say our, we're not just talking about the our, but our as a unit. And how can we invite our partner to share these things if they're maybe not so vocal or so fluid in their announcement of these things? And there are strategies, there are things that we can do that promote these progressive communications, as you say.
Exactly. And so one of those strategies of success are, obviously, we talked already about sharing personal boundaries, but also developing agreements with our partners about how our relationship is going to work. And so the thing that we teach is our values-based agreement. So creating agreement rather than rules based on the things we value in a relationship. And so it defines the actions, the things we will do, and the things we'll say to maintain those values in our relationship.
I'm smiling because it makes me think about dinner we went to. I think it was Friday or Saturday night, and we were with a mixed couple, a mixed group of people, and this person that we were speaking to was not in the polyamorous way of being, of open relating, and they asked us what kind of rules we had in our relationship, and we both kind of chuckled and said, "Well, we try to avoid rules and think that there's greater merit in having." Value-based agreements, that we come to these things with the reason being that a rule tends to sound as though this is the edict. I am putting this down and you have to comply, compared to we both have a desire for this because we both agree in it. We both hold this to be of value. And it really changes the whole dynamic of it. It doesn't feel as though we're being policed, but also, most importantly, because we both value this way of being, as opposed to saying, I feel insecure, so I'm going to create this rule, this boundary in order to protect me, or think that it will protect me, create this false illusion. It's a lot different than having the other person really subscribing to the same or similar ways of being.
Exactly. And when we have an agreement, it's clearer and we know what we are consenting to.
I was going to add to that, though, when there are certain things that are so important to us, we will advocate for them and say, well, this is my boundary. And you need to respect that. I want you to be able to consent and respect and acknowledge this. And that will make us feel more secure.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you start with developing agreement with any of your partners, first, it's important to understand what your own personal boundaries are and your own values are. And then you can come to the table with your partner or partners and, create, find out what your shared values are and how you can create an agreement around that. But also, what's important to each of you and what personal boundaries you have around the relationship.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So another strategy for success seems like obvious, but worth saying, is understanding each other's needs and that might be things that are defined within your agreement as well. Like, how can you support each other's differing needs? Such as, monogamous person might need additional feelings of security, and how do they wish that to happen? And a polyamorous person's need might be around autonomy, and how can you respect those two different things?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it will always come down to being able and willing to participate in open and honest communication.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the tricky things sometimes people get into, and I've certainly heard this from various people that, I've worked with and talked with and through the groups and stuff like that, is, a fear about communicating needs or feelings of insecurity when you're the person maybe that's more monogamous leaning, and the other person's polyamorous, is that the feeling that there might be repercussions, or that the polyamorous person might not be open to listening to it, or vice versa.
Yeah, but vice versa. Absolutely. As you're saying that, I was thinking about my position as a polyamorous person, speaking to somebody who is monogamous and thinking, well, will my practices, will my desires be acceptable to them? Especially, as you say, so much of society around the world really is monogamous or has been monogamous for the longest time. So can I announce myself in this way? And do I imagine that it will be acceptable? Or do I simply then have to try and hide or minimize these feelings and participate in a different model that might not be so well suited to me?
Exactly. And so one of the other strategies for success that people found work for them is external support. So, utilizing community support. So such as groups like ours, our Let's Talk Polyamory community on Facebook. There's tons of other different support groups. There's even a monopoly group, I believe, out there, getting, involved in peer groups and discussion groups. But also getting professional support as well. So therapists and coaches like us, I mean, we obviously, have programs and practices that can help, but there's lots of people out there and lots of places you can get that external support, because it's not always easy to navigate these things, especially if you're new.
No, absolutely. And, I think I was extremely fortunate that I came from a rather open society, but I have worked with many people and have many friends who came from what they themselves termed as a closed network, a close society, they were not open to this idea of open relating. They were not seen as viable ways of being. So then when the person felt that they wanted to explore this or found themselves to be any way other than monogamous, there was very often a moral part put. So they were being corrupt or bad in some way because they weren't participating in this. And being able to have community, being able to speak to, as you say, a therapist or other forms of guidance really helps us to hear ourselves and to helps it to be normalized, to say, well, this too is just as valid and just as viable. You are entitled to have your thoughts and feelings these ways.
Yeah, and I think it's important to stress that when we're seeking out external support, especially if it's a therapist or coach or something like that, is that they are familiar with polyamory and consensual non-monogamy. They're poly-friendly. There's like lists out there that you can find. Because, I've heard it multiple times that people went to therapy, like especially couples, and, who have opened the relationship and having some difficulty. And, a therapist or coach saying like, well, why not close it down? Why not shut things down rather than trying to work through things? And I'm not saying that that's like common and therapists would do that, but it has been an experience of some people I've spoken to.
Unfortunately, you are correct. Yes, I've heard it myself that therapists said, well, when are you going to get over this phase, or what's making you want to go out and demonstrate this way, as though it is in itself inherently corrupt. There's some pathology next to it. It's kind of like what it was years ago, and maybe unfortunately still happens in some places, like conversion therapy, right? What's making you gay? Why are you needing to go out and what's wrong? As though there would be anything wrong with being the way that you are, right? So having supportive guidance, having people who speak your same language may be very beneficial, especially when it's new to you. Finding out that it is quite okay to be some other way, that we have tolerance. And we're not saying that because we are monogamous, everyone should be monogamous. And we're not saying that because we're polyamorous, everyone should be. We should allow for our own expressions, but being able to be clear, open, and honest about it.
And that doesn't mean if you're working with a poly-friendly coach or therapist that they're going to force polyamory on you either. I work with people now and, we have discussions about what actually is the right dynamic for them. And it may just be that monogamy is for them. They don't want to be in a monopoly relationship or a polyamorous relationship at all. And that is perfectly valid as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And also how it might shift and morph over time, right? Because we are essentially plastic. We change. So you and I, the personal story, we started off as polyamorous, both being polyamorous, but over time, in certain scenarios, in different ways of being, we have subscribed to a more monogamous model. And sometimes we even entertain the idea that, well, in the future, we might be monogamous. But we are free to make those choices, and we will announce it to each other and talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And so those are some of the strategies for success. And thanks to those who commented in our post in our Facebook group about their own real life examples and stories about being in monopoly relationships. And, there was lots of interesting stuff there. I love one of the ones, somebody said that they're mono and they're totally in love with their polyamorous person and they're happy that they are that. They love that about them, that their heart is so big and they're so capable of so much love for them and for others. And, they said that there have been struggles and stuff. But, the two of them are working on having balance and making sure needs are met and putting the intentional effort into the relationship that they to make sure it works. So I think that's awesome.
That sure is.
Some people have said that, if they're polyamorous, they do not date monogamous people because it just creates too tough of a dynamic for them. Because, it just too many issues that come up. And I think that's a personal choice too.
Well, the same is true of, I've heard many people who are polyamorous saying that they will not date monogamous people because very often they are accused of not being serious enough or not growing up in time, but also that they are somewhat concerned that the monogamous person may not tolerate their being polyamorous and try and conform them and bring them back to being monogamous. So it goes both ways.
Exactly. So thanks for sharing your stories. You can always share more about your situation. So let's just go over some final thoughts and key takeaways. So the first thing I'd love to say is that, mono-poly relationships are a valid relationship dynamic. And there's definitely ways that they can be successful and work for both parties in the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. There is not just one way of relating, as we see, right? There are many different things. And again, you know what I'm going to say. All we have to do is talk about it. Let's say everything about it. Let's find out where we're in this, and then find out where we consent, where there's overlap, and respect when there's not that overlap. And you are free to be you, I'll be free to be me, and we'll see where we fit together in the mix.
Exactly. And so there's importance to having flexibility, mutual respect, self-awareness, and expressing our needs in making these relationships work. Awesome. So we'd love for you to continue to submit your stories. You can comment on the podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, there's a comment feature. If you like this podcast, we'd love it if you gave us a review and follow us. It really helps others find us and get this awesome message of polyamory out into the world and normalizing it. And of course, reach out if you're struggling to navigate your relationships, whether it's monopoly or something else. We have a complimentary consultation, and we have various resources, both free and paid programs that we can support you with. So it's all there for you.
Sure is. Waiting for you.
Waiting for you. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in to episode of season 2. We're super excited to bring you new guests coming up soon. Don't forget to stop in and say hello to us at the Taboo Show if you're in Toronto, and you can take us up on our Poly Newbies course at the special, listener price. And so we'll make sure we put all the links in the show notes.
Again, that show that Tara mentioned, the Taboo, Everything About Sex show, is in Toronto, Ontario, on October 18th to the 20th, 2024.
Exactly. So we invite you to listen to the next episode as soon as it's posted and catch up on previous ones. There's 29 of them before this one. So thanks everyone for listening, and have a sexy day.
You too. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, everyone.
If you want to explore polyamory, open up a relationship, or try your hand at swinging, we can help. Check out our website at taranandre.com for information on our Poly Newbies digital course or our deeper dive open relationship and polyamory mastery program, where you get direct coaching from us. There's also other individual and couples coaching options there as well. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with T&A. Don't forget to subscribe and give us some love on your favorite podcasting platform. You can check out the show notes for any of the links to the courses or information we talked about today. Thanks, and have a fantastic and sexy day.